For some reason that I still don't fully understand, the moment the wild-eyed baboon Rafiki appears on the TV screen, I turn it off. When I was in middle school, my sister and I watched opera every summer afternoon sitting on the living room sofa, and there was this unspoken rule that if something comes on the TV that we ought not to be watching, we would turn the TV off. You know, mom was always somewhere behind, about to walk in on us. I remember this one time being alone in the living room with the TV when opera announced that there would be an exclusive performance by the Lion King Broadway theater crew to an audience that was overwhelmed by excitement. But for some reason that I still don't fully understand, the moment the wild-eyed, face-painted baboon Rafiki appeared on the screen and launched a full-throated call, I turned the TV off. Maybe it was just too wild, too raw, too much emotion for that living room. I turned it off as though I was embarrassed on behalf of opera. Because that living room was a place that didn't see too much emotion. You know, growing up in an Indian family, we never talked about emotions around the dinner table. We watched other people's emotions play out on soap operas. We watched other people's anger and sadness and love. I remember this one time my uncle visited home, and sitting on that same living room sofa, he asked me that question that they ask every child. What do you want to be when you grow up? I didn't yet have a rehearsed answer, and so I blurted out, I want to be a writer. His eyebrows furrowed, and he said, writers only grow old and long white hair and become angry people. As silly as I now know that was, I remember I didn't know how to express how that made me feel at that time, and I walked out of the room in anger and never talked much with him after that. Despite my anger, however, I never did write much for years after that, as though shutting out my gift was the one way I knew how to deal with the knowledge that it didn't belong in the world. 7 years later, I enrolled myself in architecture college, thinking that was the only way that my creativity could package itself in an acceptable form in the world. 2 years ago, I dreamed of a strange apocalyptic world where a virus has turned people into zombies. But they are not frightening, they just have no eyes. They are raw, pink, fleshy bodies curled up like fetuses. They look helpless. I am taking refuge in a treehouse in a forest, and a strange man of the forest comes and shows us that the answer to the virus lies somewhere deep in the bark of that tree, underneath its layers of raw wood, and we start peeling, looking for it. Have you ever seen the fire burn bright in the eyes of somebody? I have. 3 years ago, I remember seeing a bright, chirpy girl enter a counseling room for career advice. Her name is Ritu. An inventory lies before her on the table, and the counselor that I am shadowing, she flips through the inventory and she tells her what the data says she should be. It's something about law and legal strategy. She tells her that all this strategy stuff is something the data says she can do, that all this strategy stuff is something that all those other guys do, and since all those others do it, so can she, and so can he, and all the other she's. I see the girl's face dropping as she tries to make sense of these words, listening to them as though they are the declaration of a life sentence, because they are. All that fire in her eyes matters nothing before the certainty that a few questions answered in a half hour know more about the rest of her life than she can possibly know. The girl leaves the room, defined, not knowing what and why, and I see her sad, dimly dimmed eyes like of one who has not slept in days. But she smiles at me politely, because I'm older, and she thinks that older people know better. And so they must be right. For the longest time, I've dreamt of dinosaurs. At the age of 6, I dream that I am hiding under the bed. There is thunder and storm outside, and a giant red angry T-Rex eye is watching me. From outside my bedroom window, it can see me even under the bed. There is no hiding from it. As I grow older, the same T-Rex starts chasing me and others up and down the town, terrorizing the town. It gets painfully predictable. I was always an angry child. When tiffs broke out at home, I would pick up a metal pencil box and hit myself on the head with it. I don't know why I was so angry. I was a perfect student in school, the one that bagged all the subject prizes and came first in every class. I don't know why I was so angry. I was the quietest girl in class, the one that everyone liked. I don't know why I was so angry, except that when I got angry, I disappointed everyone. I've never seen myself, however, as a very energetic person. That was for the extroverts and the charismatic leaders of my class, but every time I've been angry, I know that's not been true. I have so much energy, and every time I've seen the mothers in the generation above me angry, I've had this thought waft through my head that were they not shouting, I might mistake them for goddesses. When they get angry, their eyes become ablaze, their expressions energize. They remind me of Goddess Durga's wild-eyed, evil-crushing anger on rage with the destruction in the world. These mothers have always been angry people, their anger multiplying by every year as the story about how they could never be all that they were meant to be starts carving a deeper wedge into their hearts. Could it be, I wonder, could it be that when we are denied our natural fire, that energy seeking a place to go erupts like anger instead? At 16, I am angry. I remember standing before the bathroom mirror rehearsing a speech that I never will give. The words tumbling out of my mouth with an energy I do not know I have. At 16, I am angry about the wastefulness of our habits, about the destruction of our planet, and I want to rouse up the apathy, the fire, the concern, all of it amongst my schoolmates, and start an environmental movement. For 1 hour, I rehearse my speech before the bathroom mirror, and the mirror mirrors my conviction back to me, but when I step out of the bathroom, I never do give the speech. By now, the words have begun to die in my throat before they leave it. I've come to believe that my wild-eyed, impassioned self is only silly, and the only things worth pursuing are achievements, because when I walk up on stage to get prizes, that's when I'm seen. I know many people who feel like this, like their voice is somewhere stuck between throat and tongue. Before the words can leave our mouths, we are already judging ourselves shut. But our gift, our voice, is like a constantly flowing river, says Lewis Hyde. And if we don't become a channel for its current, he says, that is, if somebody tries to dam up the river, either one of two things will happen. Either it will stagnate, or it will fill the person up until he bursts. One night I dream that Oprah has just given a talk and I am following up her act by hosting a workshop. I try to gather everyone in a circle. As I try to get everyone's attention, they talk over me while I try to be heard. I try to speak from my soul, scriptless, but the words barely leave my throat. I start to shout for attention, but they do not hear me. Last year I visited a prison in Massachusetts where I listened nervously to the tall, well-built men as they shared their stories about how they came to be people who murdered somebody, stabbed somebody, shot somebody. John, as I'll call him, is a young, small, bespectacled man. Looking at him in his oversized t-shirt, you wouldn't guess that he used to be a member of a gang since the time he was 8 years old. And he came to school every day carrying a gun in his pocket and dealing in drugs. On the surface, there's nothing at all in common between John and I, until John shared something. That every day while growing up, he had these words playing in his head. I'm a shit, I'm a shit, I'm a shit, I'll never amount to anything. And that transported me back to 10 years ago when I had those same words playing in my head every day and I came to college every day carrying cutter blades in my pocket. John acted out. He got into a lot of fights and he was expelled from school to school. It was like I was crying for help but nobody heard me, he says. And me? I excelled from school to college and I didn't act out, I acted in, and I wore sleeves long enough to cover my shoulders, but sometimes just wishing that somebody would see the scars and help me. I'm a shit. Those were the words probably playing in John's head that day that he had that fight with that man and he pulled out a gun and decided to shoot him. Those were the words playing in my head that day. I had that fight with my classmates and I dragged myself to my college terrace, counted 43 yellow pills and swallowed them. Is there really a difference between John and the younger me? He directed his violence outwards, I directed it inwards. He ended up in prison, I survived and ended up at Harvard. The biggest problem young people face today is not actually stress, but meaninglessness, says psychologist William Damon, and this puts them at risk of plunging into those same dark waters that I did and John did. 800,000. That's the number of people who take their lives every single year. One girl I knew back when I was in college, a girl I call Shreya, she was struggling academically, and when she doesn't come to college for 2 days, her best friend goes to check on her in her apartment. She finds that she has hung herself. When I hear the news, I'm shocked. And sometime later, it hits me. This could have also been me. Luckily, I'm still here, but Shreya isn't. And in all the days and weeks after my own attempt that I pretended to be normal, I denied someone like her a space to be heard. Yet, even knowing this, I never said anything when I saw the light fade out from the eyes of those around me over the years, of friends and family, as they started living lives determined for them by other people, and I saw their eyes go from bright to dim. I never said anything when Ritu left the counselor's office that day, looking as if a life sentence hung over her head. I wish I could go back in time and tell Ritu that just because they tell you you can do something that this data says you can do ain't good enough reason to spend your life doing it. I want to ask her all the questions I wish that somebody had asked me at 16. I want to tell her, to tell me of the things that tear your soul into bits and rip it up and make you shout in a way that only children can when angry. Tell me of the things that make you sound stupid because you say them too frenzied, of things that people know you for because you can't help but be them when you're just simply being. Point me to the signs left by your soul. Over the years, there have been traces in the dust that you and I had the chance to see if we would have. I believe we will only heal violence and depression in the world if we come into contact with what that fire in the belly wants to tell us. Our anger and our depression are historical, as deep in our history as our throats and even further than that. Our anger and depression are perhaps latent energy of the soul gone rogue looking for itself. One night I dreamed that I take refuge from the world in a submarine underwater. The submarine has been taken over by hundreds of mad men and I hide from them in the bathroom. Meanwhile, the terrestrial people are out searching for me. And I soon discovered that the madmen know who I am taking refuge from, and they are actually not the ones to be feared. They are here to help me escape being found by the terrestrial men. Sometimes that nagging feeling telling you this is not me, this is not me, this is not me, is the one you finally have to follow to retrieve what is you. That's the softly growing, fast awakening voice that I followed in a dream that brought me to live in a forest city in South India 8 years ago. A city that calls itself a laboratory for human consciousness, I was all for it. But as a city-bred girl hailing from hard desks and hard streets, from places where trees aren't climbed and a sparrow spotted is a thing worth noting, it was the first time I found myself in nature at the ripe old age of 21. Its contours were so frightening. On my first day there, I walked through the forest crying, as the knowledge of my aloneness in the wild, my alienation from the wild swept over me. The first day I learned to cycle, I fell into a bush of thorns, thorn piercing through leg, blood spurting out a shooting pain. I still have that scar from that fall, and I'm proud of it. I call it my scar of freedom. Because that day that I learned to cycle, I could at last be on my own, alone, moving through nothing but wilderness. Me in the trees, me under the vast sky, me under hot May sun burning brown skin red. In that iron red soil I discovered archaeology, that art of recovery that we must wield to excavate out our buried fire, to find it burning under all those layers of conditioning. Archaeology, this is now the art of the great turning, to peel off what is old and lead out from the soul. But descent or not, trying to return to a normal world after submarining with madmen underwater isn't easy. This world was not designed for our returning, it was designed for our expulsion. And yet we have to be the ones that make it worth the return for one another. For the longest time, one of the things I dreaded the most upon my return was going to those strange dystopias of alcohol and blue light that we call our parties. I dreaded being asked that question that they all ask, what do you do? I've known people who, like me, have been in a state of transition who just don't go out anymore because they don't know how to answer this question. It's not that we don't know what we want from our lives, we don't know what life wants from us yet. We're standing at a tipping point where we are being called to something by life, and rather than gripping the steering wheel firmly in our own hands, we are ready to become a bit loose, to surrender to something. And how do we stand at a party and tell people that that's why we appear rudderless? We appear rudderless because we are being magnetized. How can we even begin to put words to that when the world sees our identities as fixed in what we do rather than in what we love or care deeply about or imagine for our world? But I believe once we've crossed that first barrier of not accepting ourselves, we will no longer be able to help but speak our truth. And when we do that, we will call for truth from various corners of the world where they reside. It's a poverty of our culture that we ask one another, what do you do, as if that were the sum of a person, writes Takopa Turner. What if we listened to each other as though every person were a vast river heading to a great waterfall of energetic downpour in the world, capable of sending forth vast deep ripples into the cosmos? Then our children would not be asked what do you want to be when you grow up, but who you want to be. What stirs you? What do you love enough to listen to? What we all need is somebody who can just sit with us and watch us unfold from that place that we already are. One night I dreamed that a woman is standing outside her little home in the forest. She is hanging clothes on a laundry line, and the clothes are like signals to passers-by who are lost, and they come to her home seeking guidance. In other dreams, the dinosaurs return, but this time when they terrorized the town, I remember that I brought them here, and I can also ride them into that line of watch guards in the distance along with my other female friends. My 16-year-old self asks me today what she wishes she could have asked someone back then, on that day that her voice got frozen into the bathroom mirror. Who am I? What are my gifts? And how can I use them in service of something bigger? Tell me these questions are worth asking. Tell me these questions deserve my time. Tell me there are people out there with no titles who call themselves what they like, who are not roles but purposes that shift shape and form based on what's needed of them at any given time. On that day in the counselor's office, I wish that I could have waited for the counselor to leave the room, for the family to leave the room, and whispered to 16-year-old Ritu this. Told her I want to listen to what her soul is saying about her deep stirring to be part of the world in more meaningful ways than we know it. I don't get all that angry all that often anymore, but I often get heartbroken, and thinking of Ritu breaks my heart. Thinking of Shreya breaks my heart. Thinking of John breaks my heart. Thinking of my mother, my family, my friends, whose eyes I have seen go from bright to dim over the years, breaks my heart. I wish I could hold up a mirror for all of their wild-eyed, impassioned voices to be heard outside of a bathroom mirror. But no one tells us that to walk around with a broken heart is the bravest thing we can do. Everyone tells us to toughen up, thicken up. No one tells us that our thin skins are what will save us. Maybe on those angry days, depressed days, lost days, what we are grieving really without knowing it is the loss of our truest selves. The gift must always move, says Lewis Hyde. And our choice is whether to keep it moving or to be eaten with it. Maybe our grief is coming from that edge of that place, that longing that lives right next to that place that we have known in our hearts for the longest time. That new yet ancient home on whose front porch we hang our body clothes inside out on the laundry line. This is a conversation that's happening way too little in far and few places, but maybe there is meaning even in this global pandemic, in how we are twisted up in a bind, our entire way of being turned inside out as our houses close down from outside, forcing many of us into thinking, what is it after all that I want to do with these dreams, with this heart, with this voice? And maybe this is the descent we have been invited to take into our dreams, into our heartbreak, and into our wild-eyed, full-throated Rafiki voices.